I'm Jarrett Carpenter, and this is Future Signal. I'm currently in Costa Rica, and it is very, very hot, and I had to cut the fans. That is why this will be the first podcast where I am without a shirt. So that's just what we're doing. I've tried to do this podcast before. I recorded it, and I was dying sweating. You could see I looked like Kevin Garnett in the playoffs. It wasn't a good look, so this is what we're doing. I feel a little bit cooler, but I had to turn out the fans so that way the audio is okay if you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple. There is the preamble. Let's get into the episode. On this episode, I want to focus on the 5 adoption trends that you need to be aware of so when they happen, you're not surprised, but know that these are kind of like road marks. If you're running a race, you're like, okay, when I get to this point, I know I'm halfway. When I get to this point, I'm 3/4 of the way, and they're kind of just like mental checkoffs. So let's go ahead and check off some things off the list. I'm going to lay you out the map that I personally am looking at when I think about Bitcoin moving forward. So let's just dive right in. Number 1, and once again, I think all these are both macro and micro. I'll try to talk about them in those ways. And I'm thinking about these things as the signal amongst the noise. Okay, there's going to be a lot of noise as Bitcoin goes up in price, no matter what price it gets to. Every single price it goes up to, there seems to be new haters. Last trend, there was a guy who even wrote a book about how it was a scam. He did a whole media tour. He was on all these podcasts. He's since gone away. I think every single time it explodes, as the price explodes, I should say, as the attention comes to the overall network and the ecosystem, people come out the woodworks because they can just take pot shots at it. And we know that stuff on the internet that's negative is 6 times more likely to kind of go viral. So that's what people are going to do. I hope that you hear these signals and you're like, okay, that's something interesting to look out for. Number 1 is social media. As we move forward, we are going to start to see social media companies offer Bitcoin wallets. I think it will probably be the Bitcoin Lightning Network, but they're going to probably be able to have in-app wallet access. There is a future on social media where, for example, if you're on Instagram, you are totally going to be able to say, okay, let me buy this thing from this influencer or this creator or this thing that's just popped up. And one of the options is going to be your Lightning wallet. And what you'll basically be able to do is you probably won't be able to buy Bitcoin on Instagram, but you'll be able to use that Lightning wallet to transfer in Bitcoin that you own to then buy stuff in app. So you just stay all in app. Instead of having like the Apple Pay pop up or where you can put in your credit card information, one of the things you'll likely be able to save on your wallet, or you're basically going to have a wallet in Instagram. You're going to be able to create a Bitcoin Lightning account. Now, anyone who uses Lightning, you don't want to keep a lot of money on there. So we're talking about keeping $100 to $200 of digital cash for anything that you want to do on Instagram. Maybe there's going to be a concert of your favorite artist and they're like, click on my link, use Lightning to buy it right now. And that way you don't even have to go through PayPal and you can do it direct. The peer-to-peer network of Bitcoin is going to allow creators and influencers and people who are creating stuff on the internet to honestly just live a completely different life and be able to avoid fees, which is going to be great for the people that are following them and great for the creators because they're not getting cut out by middlemen. So go ahead and think about this as we move forward, that almost every single social media app, I think eventually will have its own wallet. Once again, you likely won't be able to buy Bitcoin in that particular app, for example, like in Instagram, but you're going to be able to buy Bitcoin in all these other places and then send it into your Instagram. So that way you have Bitcoin on your Instagram and you can pay for stuff. That's number 1. Social media. And once again, I don't know if that's a micro or a macro. It's micro because it's going to influence everyone's individual life, but it's macro because there are billions of people on the planet that play a part and partake in these particular ecosystems. Let's go on to number 2, traditional finance. When I say traditional finance, I think about the bank apps that we have on our phones. And people have always asked me, what's going to be peak Bitcoin adoption for you? And for me, it's going to be when I can go into my traditional finance bank app. If you're in the US, it's like Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and I'm sure there's a couple others, or maybe there's not because of all the bank consolidations. But most people have Chase, Wells Fargo, or Bank of America. I think so. You're going to be able to go into any one of those apps and just buy Bitcoin and then have Bitcoin in your app. Just like when you go to check your credit card balance or your debit balance or any kind of personal loan that you have, a HELOC, any type of other thing that maybe would show up through that bank. Maybe that's where you have your mortgage, you're paying that down. Maybe you've refinanced your student loans into a private loan and you have that. All your financial stuff is on your bank app. And I think in the future, very, very shortly, I would say in the next 2 to 3 years, I'd say by 2028, and you can hold me to this, and this is going to go by like this. I know we're at the beginning of 2025. You are going to be able to go into your bank app and you are going to be able to buy Bitcoin. Now, if you're a Bitcoiner and you're listening to this, the question becomes, will I be able to move my Bitcoin off app? I really don't know. I don't know if it's going to be custodial or non-custodial. I think it will probably start as Coinbase did, and it will kind of be like an exchange where you're going to buy Bitcoin and you're going to just keep it on the exchange. If it's kept on the exchange or kept on your bank app, it's really not yours because they're going to own the private keys to the wallet. However, like Coinbase did, I do think in the future, as Coinbase now has the Coinbase wallet, which is a custodial wallet where you can take control of your Bitcoin. And I think it's a very, very awesome product because you will hold the seed phrases. If we think about Chase, I think Chase will eventually allow you to be able to buy Bitcoin through their banking app. And then eventually Chase will launch its own crypto wallet, branded wallet, where you can go own the keys to the crypto. And it will be a hot wallet. You'll be able to keep your Bitcoin there, own the keys, but it will be a Chase Bank wallet. Let's see how that plays out. But I think that the kind of framework that Coinbase has given to the world with having the Coinbase exchange and having the Coinbase wallet in the simultaneous and kind of symbiotic relationship that those two have, let's keep an eye out for that. The third signal to keep an eye out on, it kind of builds off some of the traditional finance that we just left talking about banking apps. And it is the idea that I think more and more people are going to start to see Bitcoin as the vehicle to find retirement. Now, I have been preaching through this channel and on this podcast for almost 3 years, almost going on 4 years, that millennials really need to see Bitcoin as the vehicle to help them get to retirement. I have been saying this as loud as people will hear me, and I think we're going to continue to see that trend only grow as we get into 2025 and kind of moving forward. I think the playbook of your house, the 401k, if you have a pension and you're lucky to have a pension, and Social Security, people are waking up to the idea that those are not vehicles that are probably going to get us to the promised land of retirement. As it is right now, there is a large percent of millennials that are not going to be able to retire at the age that they want. Now, that can be somewhere likely between 60 to 65, but they're not going to be able to retire because they're not going to have the money ready to say, hey, let me stop working. This is for a million reasons, and I don't want to go too deep into the rabbit hole. One of the reasons, however, is that things are becoming more expensive. Inflation is running rampant almost everywhere. And I think that this will continue as we debase the currency, and we're going to need more pesos, dollars, and euros to buy the things that we want. The other reason is that we're living longer. When the idea of retirement was first kind of thought up and kind of came into our zeitgeist here, people weren't living to 90, 100, or let me say people were living, but there wasn't a larger populace of people that are able to kind of live into those older ages. So you are actually now needing more money put together so that way you can retire. The combination of those two, inflation, the debasement of currency, which I kind of see as almost the same thing at this point, and the fact that we're living longer, it's becoming really, really, really tough. And I talk to millennials all the time and I say, today is a great day to start to think about your retirement and put that together. Obviously, you could tell per this episode and per kind of what I'm doing in life, Bitcoin plays a huge part and a huge role in how I'm thinking about how I'll get to retirement. And kind of building on that, let's talk about vehicles of wealth. Number 4 is real estate money going into Bitcoin. This is a narrative and this is a signal that I think is going to continue to hit as we move forward. So people really need to be paying attention to this, okay? More and more people are going to start taking either equity out of their homes because they're going to sell their homes and they're going to rent, or if you have a rental portfolio and you have 4 or 5 doors that you manage, they're going to start taking that money and they're going to sell an apartment, sell 2 doors, sell 2 apartments, and move that money into Bitcoin. This is for a whole host of things, but I think there's 2 ideas that really stick out for me. It's the premiums and profit. So let's talk about premiums. Insurance premiums are getting absolutely crazy. And this is all in the wake. This episode is going to come out on the 13th of January, which is going to be just days after, and I think we're kind of still in the LA fires of 2025. We've kicked off 2025 with decimating fires in LA. Years ago, the United States, there was a stat that said, hey, every year we're going to lose about $100 billion to, as hopefully you can hear that bird, here in Costa Rica. Every year we're going to lose about $100 billion to the climate crisis. And they're just like, okay, this is the cost of basically doing business now. This being the U.S. government as far as aid that they're going to have to give. $100 billion. This was not even that long ago, less than a decade ago. As of right now, it is estimated that the LA fires will cost around $500 billion. So 5x increase on a previous prognostication in about 7 days' time. We are not set up for this. So because of how much that is costing, the risk is increasing of owning homes in certain parts of the country, which is why State Farm has now left California and left Florida, two of the biggest populated states other than Texas in the United States, which brings me to the premiums. Insurance premiums are going to continue to rise to a point where it may not make sense to own. If you're a homeowner and you're going to have to pay these premiums that are doubling or tripling as we move forward, and some of them already have done this in Florida as literally the water starts to rise and hurricanes become more frequent and more powerful. So there's premiums. I think homeowners, whether you're a single family homeowner or whether you have a real estate portfolio, you're going to look at the premiums and either it's becoming so expensive when the premiums are just almost maybe at the price of your mortgage, depending upon when you got your mortgage, or if you have a bunch of real estate properties, your margin is being lost. Your profit margin is being lost for the rent and the cash flow you get based off of these premiums because you're getting squeezed. So there's the premiums, and then there is the profit. I wanted to say that. I just think the long term, as we're printing money, the idea of owning a home is becoming less and less sexy, especially to younger people. They're not seeing it like it used to be. We are in a total movement towards rent and buy Bitcoin. If you spend any time on X or Bitcoin X, you will see many people talk about this. I personally know many people who are Bitcoiners who are intentionally renting just so they can get more Bitcoin set up, and then maybe one day they'll go ahead and buy. Similar to how in the past it was always said, make sure you get your real estate portfolio together and then buy a home. Don't put the cart before the horse. Make sure you have enough basically base before you go ahead and buy that single family home. And something for me that I worry about is so many people in the United States have so much of their wealth tied up in their homes. What happens if you lose your home and all of a sudden it's not insured? There are thousands of people that are dealing with this right now in LA who probably didn't have that fire coverage that they needed, and now they've lost their house and therefore all of their equity. So this is something I think we need to be looking out, is the money from real estate going into housing. The money from real estate going into Bitcoin. And this may sound absolutely crazy to you, but I want to give an anecdote and also leave you with a couple other stats. The anecdote is I was recently talking to my money mentor. And he was like, hey, I'm trying to wrap my head around Bitcoin. And he said, I'm trying to do this because, and he knows about Bitcoin. He's had Bitcoin. He's owned Bitcoin. He's got some profits out in 2017, I think 2021. But he's never really stayed in. It's not been something that's attractive to him. He is a real estate guy. And he called me basically because he heard this story from a realtor friend that he has of a woman who's a high net worth individual. And she went and sold her real estate. And she sold it at a loss. And, she got 70 cents on the dollar. So she sold her real estate, some of the, doors she had in her real estate portfolio, her apartments, at a 30% loss, only getting 70 cents on the dollar. And the realtor was like, his friend was like, hey, do you mind if I ask you why you sold this? It feels like if we had waited, 6 months or waited for the market or whatever, maybe we would have gotten more money. And she was like, honestly, I just need to get this into Bitcoin as soon as I possibly can. And if you want the full detail, it was not only as soon as I possibly can, it's before Donald Trump takes office. By the time you hear this, we will be a week out from Donald Trump's inauguration as he comes in as second president. It doesn't really matter where you sit now on the left or the right. This is going to happen. And one of the things that Donald Trump is bringing into office is he's bringing one of the most crypto-friendly and Bitcoin-friendly administrations we have ever seen. So this woman was reading the tea leaves, if you will, and saying, I need to move my money into Bitcoin because this is where the United States, from a policy and regulation standpoint, seems to be going. And for me, this is where the world seems to be going. So that's a little anecdote of someone who's literally saying, I don't care if I take a 30% haircut because I need to get this money into this new system if this is where the money is going to be flowing from the high net worth individuals, the wealthy, the banks, and finally sovereign nations, which is actually number 5. But before we jump into that, I just want to say that Bitcoin right now is somewhere around $95,000. And if you look at the price of Bitcoin and you look at the price of an average home in the United States, over the last decade, you need less and less Bitcoin to buy the single family home. So you used to need hundreds. Now you need about 4.5 Bitcoin if the average single family home is about 450,000. So it used to be over 400 Bitcoin you would need, and now you need about 4.5, which means that when you look at Bitcoin over the last, I think it's like a decade or whatever, I can look at, and the farther you go back, the more that this actually skews. But the price of Bitcoin is demonetizing the housing industry, which is why people are doing this, which is why single family homeowners, I know people who have sold their single family home are now renting and they're buying Bitcoin. I know people who have sold apartment buildings and doors in their rental portfolio and bought Bitcoin, and it's worked out. And this is why, because over a long enough period of time, the price of your house in Bitcoin it's getting demonstrably cheaper if you own that Bitcoin. So while it used to be, say, 400 Bitcoin to buy a single family home, even though the price of housing has gone up, say 30 to 40 to 50%, what you need in Bitcoin has gone down by 99% plus. And that number only grows exponentially the farther you go back. When Bitcoin was, say, when it was $100, you needed so much more Bitcoin to get to 450,000, right? But now that each Bitcoin is worth 100,000, the math is also getting easier to do. But basically, you're needing less and less Bitcoin. And this is what people are looking at, and they're saying, if I'm trying to build real wealth, I don't want the risks of the climate crisis weighing over my head. Maybe Bitcoin is the better move. So that's the fourth signal. And finally, the fifth signal I just alluded to was the idea of sovereign nation adoption. This is probably the biggest thing, and this is going to take probably 15 to 20 years for this to really shake out. But there's going to be three things that nations are probably going to do, and the United States is included in this. The first two already have really nice playbooks or case studies. The first one is make Bitcoin legal tender. So if we go out to dinner and we each spend $30, instead of me Venmoing you, I can just send you $30 on Lightning if you ended up paying for it. Say you used your credit card and maybe the restaurant doesn't accept Bitcoin, which would kind of be weird in this hypothetical. I could send you $30 of Bitcoin on Lightning and there wouldn't be a taxable event. Because of the way Bitcoin is set up right now, in that scenario, I would get taxed either short-term or long-term capital gains on that Bitcoin, which doesn't really make it kind of the digital cash that it's supposed to be. So that's going to be one thing. And El Salvador has already done this. They said, let's make this a local currency, a national currency, so that way you can use it in your day-to-day. You could use it to buy a car. You could use it to buy a house. You could use it to buy some tomatoes at the store. You're probably going to use Lightning Network, so the fees are, less than 1%, which would actually be cheaper than your current credit card fees. So there's that. Number one, making it a national currency. The second one is following what Bhutan has already been doing. Bhutan, since about 2015, has been using their hydroelectric resources to mine Bitcoin. And I think moving forward, every country is going to look at their overall energy portfolio, and they're going to see where they have extra energy, surplus energy, and they're going to start mining Bitcoin, because why not? Instead of just flaring the gas out into the sky, why don't we get some Bitcoin from it? That's a great thing. If we have a dam and there's too much energy and the dam sits next to this town that only uses 10% of the energy, why don't we put some Bitcoin miners near it and let's get the other 90% back? Countries in Africa, countries all over the world, in South America are already doing this. I think the U.S. is going to take from these playbooks, but especially look at Bhutan, which I think is going to be one of the wealthiest countries when it comes to citizens per Bitcoin in the future, because they have less than 1 million people in their country and they've been mining Bitcoin since 2015. So moving forward, I think that that's going to be a huge narrative around energy as people basically say, where is all of our surplus energy, and where as a country could we give subsidies to the private sector or for the public sector to go ahead and actually mine Bitcoin? That's another bigger narrative which will slowly start to play out. That narrative will probably take a little bit longer just because there is so much that needs to be done on the energy infrastructure, the policy, the regulation. And then finally, number 3. Now, I've been talking about this third one for a while as far as the sovereign nation adoption, right? You have make it a national currency. You have mine it with all your excess or surplus energy. And then you have number 3, which is create a Bitcoin national reserve. This is going to be proposed in Donald Trump's probably first 2 years. And even if it's not accepted, it's okay. The legislation will be put out, and that's going to be good to have that on paper. The other really bullish thing for Bitcoin, and that's a great signal for me, and I think for many people in the Bitcoin industry, is that states are looking to adopt it. Each state potentially could have its own Bitcoin treasury where it says, yeah, we hold 300 Bitcoin, 400 Bitcoin, 3,000 Bitcoin or whatever. And that could help each state weather the future uncertainty of so many things. But for me, looking at the climate crisis, having Bitcoin on hand to be able to deploy something that's not going to be inflated away from the Federal Reserve is going to be a great thing. And the sooner the state adopts a Bitcoin standard, the sooner a nation adopts a Bitcoin standard or Bitcoin strategy, the better. And when you get all the way back down to the micro, to the you and me, this is why people are buying Bitcoin. This is why I'm buying Bitcoin. I'm looking at the thing and I'm saying the Federal Reserve is going to continue to print trillions of dollars to be able to pay off our debt. We're going to have to continue to print trillions of dollars annually now as a country. Well, sorry, maybe not trillions, but maybe. Let's say let's say the government even decides to cover the LA fires at $500 billion. That's $500 of billions of dollars that are diluting all of the dollars that you and I hold. So moving forward, that's why people are going to be adopting a Bitcoin standard, both from the micro and the individual level up to maybe the local level, to the regional level, and to the national level. On the day, I should say, that the U.S. says, you know what, we now have a Bitcoin national reserve, you bet your bottom dollar, I've said this, within 3 months, the price doubles or triples because the rest of the countries in the world are going to look at this and say the game theory is here. We either hop on this bandwagon or we don't. Bitcoin is a technology much like gunpowder or much like the internet. And if you didn't dive into gunpowder early, your country was probably in trouble quickly. If you are still on the sidelines on the internet, whether you're an individual, a local, state, nation, your country is probably in some serious trouble. And I feel the same way about Bitcoin. The sooner you get in and you have a strategy from an investment standpoint, whether it's 1% or 2%, the better. To end this, I want to quote Rick Edelman, who had his final podcast the other day. Rick Edelman is a money mentor for many people. He's a billionaire. He runs a multi-billion dollar fund of investments. He's been in on Bitcoin as one of the earliest people probably talking about it on a podcast, and definitely one of the earliest financial advisors saying, hey, you might want some exposure. He said the other day, and without any other context, he said, it's now at a place where having zero Bitcoin in your portfolio is no longer responsible, which is why I always come back to just buy $5, watch the price for a couple months, and then make a decision. $5 isn't going to kill you, and that $5 is actually buying you less month over month. So thank you so much for checking out this episode. I really hoped you enjoy it. And once again, let's watch social media. Let's watch the traditional finance system. Let's see what happens with the banking apps. Let's see what happens with retirement. Let's see what happens with real estate, and let's see what sovereign nations decide to do. If you enjoyed this episode, please go ahead and subscribe on YouTube. If you're listening on a podcast platform, please go ahead and subscribe. Follow us anywhere on social media at Future Signal Pod, and be sure to reach out if you have an idea for an episode or if you want to be a guest. Thanks as always for checking out Future Signal, and I will see you next time.